Elena didn't know that the man watching her work from the shadows of the castle's fitting chamber was the Alpha King himself. She didn't know that his golden eyes had been following her every movement for the past hour, cataloguing the gentle precision of her fingers as she pinned silk and measured seams. And she certainly didn't know that the moment she'd stepped into his presence, something in his chest had pulled tight like a golden thread finding its other half. All she knew was that she had work to finish before Marcus came looking for her. The ceremonial robes draped across her workstation were exquisite, deep midnight blue with silver threading that caught the afternoon light streaming through the tall windows. Elena had been summoned to take final measurements for the Alpha King's upcoming coronation anniversary, though she'd been told he wouldn't be present for the fitting. Castle seamstresses worked with wooden forms and previous measurements, never with the royals themselves, which was why her breath caught when she heard the heavy footsteps behind her. "Don't stop!" came a voice like aged whiskey, rough and warm. "I'm curious to see how you work." Eleanor's hands stilled on the fabric. She knew that voice, though she'd only heard it from a distance during royal addresses. Every wolf in the kingdom would recognize the Alpha King's command, the way it seemed to resonate in their very bones. She turned slowly, her heart hammering against her ribs. He was larger than she'd expected, broader through the shoulders, with dark hair that looked like he'd been running his hands through it. But it was his eyes that made something flutter dangerously in her stomach. Golden amber, like honey in sunlight, and they were fixed on her with an intensity that made her feel exposed. "Your Majesty," she whispered, dropping into a curtsy so deep her knees nearly touched the stone floor. "I didn't know you would be—" "Stand up." The command was gentle but absolute. "I want to see the fit properly." Eleanor rose on unsteady legs. This was wrong. Royal protocol dictated that seamstresses never work directly with the Alpha King. She should call for the head seamstress, should excuse herself, should do anything except stand here feeling like prey under that golden gaze, but she couldn't seem to move. "The shoulders need adjusting," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "If you would allow me to—" He stepped closer, close enough that she could smell cedar and something wild, like wind across mountain peaks. "Show me." Elena's hands trembled as she reached for the tape measure around her neck. The robes were draped over a wooden form, but to get proper measurements, she would need to work with him wearing them. The thought of touching the Alpha King, of standing close enough to breathe the same air, made her light-headed. "I should fetch the head seamstress," she said quickly. "This isn't appropriate." "Eleanor." The sound of her name in his voice stopped her cold. How did he know her name? She was nobody, just another seamstress in a castle full of servants. Her name shouldn't exist in the Alpha King's vocabulary. "How do you—" "Help me with the robe." He was already reaching for the garment, his movements fluid and confident. "Unless you're afraid." It was a challenge, delivered with the faintest hint of amusement. Eleanor lifted her chin, recognizing the manipulation for what it was and rising to it anyway. She was many things, but cowardly wasn't one of them. "Turn around," she said, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. He obeyed, and Eleanor found herself staring at the broad expanse of his back as he shrugged out of his simple linen shirt. Her mouth went dry. She'd seen men without shirts before. Working in the castle meant glimpsing guards training and servants labouring in the heat. But this was different. The Alpha King's skin was marked with scars that spoke of battles won, muscles that moved like liquid power beneath bronze skin. Elena forced herself to focus on the task. She was a professional. She could do this. She lifted the ceremonial robe, holding it open for him to slip his arms through. The moment her fingers brushed against his wrist to adjust the sleeve, fire shot up her arm. Not painful fire, something warm and golden and impossible, like sunlight flooding her veins. The Alpha King went perfectly still. "Did you feel that?" His voice had dropped to something rougher, more dangerous. Elena's heart was racing so fast she was sure he could hear it. "Feel what?" she whispered, though they both knew she was lying. He turned in her arms, the robe hanging open across his chest, his golden eyes searching her face. "You felt it," he said with quiet certainty. "The pull." Before Eleanor could respond, before she could step away or remember her place or do any of the sensible things her mind was screaming at her to do, the fitting chamber door burst open. "Elena!" Marcus's voice cracked across the room like a whip. "There you are. I've been looking everywhere." He stopped mid-sentence, his pale blue eyes taking in the scene. Elena, standing close enough to the Alpha King to share breath, the robe hanging loose, her face flushed with something that had nothing to do with exertion. "Your Majesty." Marcus's bow was stiff, barely meeting the minimum requirements of respect. "I've come to collect my fiancée. She's needed elsewhere." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Elena felt the change in the Alpha King like a physical force, the way his casual warmth transformed into something lethal and controlled. "Your fiancé?" The Alpha King's voice was deceptively mild. "Yes." Marcus stepped forward, his hand already reaching for Elena's arm. "We're to be married next month. Elena, come. We have wedding preparations to discuss." Elena wanted to sink into the floor. This was exactly the kind of situation she'd spent 3 years learning to avoid. Marcus hated when other men looked at her, hated when she drew attention, hated when she did anything that reminded him she existed outside of his control. She started to step toward him, started to fall back into the pattern of submission that had kept her safe, when the Alpha King spoke. "I wasn't aware you were engaged." It wasn't a question, but Elena felt compelled to answer anyway. "Yes, Your Majesty, for 3 years now." She held up her left hand, where Marcus's grandmother's ring sat heavy and cold against her finger. "I'm already taken." The Alpha King's golden eyes fixed on the ring, and something flickered across his face. Something that looked almost like recognition, or possession. He moved faster than should have been possible, faster than her human eyes could track. One moment he was standing 3 feet away, the next his hand was wrapped around hers, his thumb brushing across the band of silver and garnets. "This ring," he said softly, his voice carrying a weight that made the air thick. "It doesn't suit you." "It was my grandmother's," Marcus said sharply, stepping closer. "It's been in my family for generations." "I wasn't talking to you." The Alpha King didn't even look at Marcus. His entire focus was on Elena, on the ring, on the way her pulse was racing beneath his touch. "It's too heavy for her hand, too cold." Elena stared up at him, mesmerized by the intensity in his golden eyes. She knew she should pull away, should return to Marcus's side, should remember her place. But the warmth of the Alpha King's touch was spreading up her arm, settling in her chest like a second heartbeat. "Elena?" Marcus's voice had taken on the sharp edge that meant trouble later. "We need to go." The Alpha King's thumb moved across her knuckles, a gentle caress that made her breath catch. "Do you want to go with him?" he asked quietly, his voice meant for her ears alone. It was such a simple question. "Do you want to go?" When was the last time someone had asked her what she wanted? When was the last time her desires had mattered at all? But wanting was a luxury Elena had learned to live without. "I should," she whispered. "That's not what I asked." His grip on her hand tightened slightly, not painful but anchoring. "Do you want to go with him?" Elena's breath caught. She looked up into those impossible golden eyes and felt something crack open in her chest. "No," she whispered before she could stop herself. "No, I don't want to go." The Alpha King smiled, and it was like watching the sun rise, slow and warm and devastating. "Then you won't." He slipped the ring from her finger in one smooth motion, the metal sliding free like it had been waiting for this moment. "Not after tonight." "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Marcus snarled, his control finally snapping. "That's my fiancé. That ring belongs to my family." The Alpha King finally looked at him, and Eleanor watched Marcus take an involuntary step backward. "Your family can have the ring," the Alpha King said pleasantly, "but she was never yours to begin with." "You can't just—" Marcus started, his face flushing red with rage and humiliation. "I'm the Alpha King," came the calm reply. "I can do whatever I want, and what I want is for you to leave my castle, now." The words hung in the air like a physical force. Eleanor felt them resonate in her bones, felt the unmistakable weight of an alpha command. Even she, with her weak human senses, could feel the power rolling off him in waves. Marcus felt it too. Elena watched his face cycle through rage, fear, and calculation, before settling on something uglier. "This isn't over," he said quietly, his pale eyes fixed on Elena. "She's mine. She's always been mine." "No," the Alpha King said softly, his hand still wrapped around Elena's. "She's not." Marcus turned and stalked from the room, but not before shooting Elena a look that promised retribution. The kind of look she'd learned to fear, the kind that meant hours of angry silence followed by cutting words designed to make her feel small and worthless. Elena was already bracing for it when she realized she was still standing in the warmth of the Alpha King's presence, still feeling the impossible pull of whatever had sparked between them, still free of the cold weight of Marcus's ring. "Are you all right?" The Alpha King's voice was gentle again, concerned. His free hand came up to brush against her cheek, and Elena realized she was shaking. "I don't understand what just happened," she whispered. "I don't understand any of this." The Alpha King studied her face for a long moment, his golden eyes seeing too much. "You don't, do you?" he said quietly. "You really don't know." "Know what?" His thumb traced across her cheek, a touch so gentle it made her eyes sting with unexpected tears. "You're my mate, Elena. You're what I've been waiting for my entire life." The words hit her like a physical blow. Mate, fated mate, the stuff of fairy tales and romance novels, the kind of thing that happened to other people. Not to Elena Thorne, seamstress and nobody, engaged to a man who treated her like property. "That's impossible," she breathed. "Is it?" He stepped closer, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "Tell me you didn't feel it when we touched. Tell me there isn't something in your chest right now that feels like coming home." Eleanor opened her mouth to deny it, to say something reasonable and sensible that would make this all go away. But the words wouldn't come, because he was right. There was something in her chest, something warm and golden and impossible that pulsed in rhythm with her heartbeat. Something that felt exactly like coming home. "I need to go," she whispered, panic rising in her throat. "Marcus will be angry. He'll be waiting." "Let him wait." The Alpha King's voice was firm but patient. "You don't have to go back to him. Not tonight. Not ever. You don't understand. I can't just... I'm nothing. I'm nobody. You're the Alpha King." "And you," he said softly, his golden eyes burning with intensity that stole her breath, "are everything I've ever wanted." Before Elena could respond, before she could process what those words meant or what they promised, he stepped back and gave her space to breathe. "I won't force you," he said quietly. "I won't command you or compel you or do anything that takes the choice away from you, but I want you to think about what you felt when we touched. I want you to remember that you said you didn't want to go with him." Elena stared at him, her mind reeling. "I can't think. I can't process this." "Then don't." He reached out and touched her hand one more time, briefly, gently. "Just feel." And Elena did feel. She felt the warmth of his touch, the safety of his presence, the impossible rightness of standing in this space with this man who claimed she was his everything. She felt hope, dangerous, terrifying hope. "What happens now?" she whispered. The Alpha King smiled, and it was full of patience and promise. "Now you go home and think about what you want, really want, and tomorrow when you're ready, we'll talk." Elena nodded, not trusting her voice. She gathered her sewing kit with trembling hands, her movements automatic and mechanical. At the door she turned back one more time. He was watching her with those golden eyes, Marcus's ring still clutched in his hand. "Your name," she said suddenly. "I don't even know your name." "Darius," he said softly. "My name is Darius." "Darius," she repeated, tasting the word. It felt right on her tongue. Everything about this felt right, which was exactly why it terrified her. "Elena," he called as she reached for the door handle. "You're not nothing. You never were." Elena met his gaze one last time, her heart hammering against her ribs, before slipping from the room and into the corridor. As she walked through the castle hallways on unsteady legs, she could still feel the phantom warmth of his touch on her skin. She could still feel the golden thread that had wound itself around her heart, connecting her to a man who claimed she was everything. The man who had just turned her entire world upside down with a single touch. The Alpha King who had looked at her like she was precious, like she was chosen, like she was his. Elena barely slept that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she could feel the phantom warmth of Darius's touch, could hear his voice saying her name like it was something precious. The golden thread that had sparked between them seemed to pulse in rhythm with her heartbeat, a constant reminder that her world had shifted on its axis in the space of a single afternoon. She sat at her small kitchen table as dawn broke over the village, cradling a cup of tea between her hands and staring at her bare ring finger. The pale band of skin where Marcus's ring had sat for 3 years looked strange, vulnerable, like a wound that was finally able to breathe. But wounds could heal, and that terrified her more than anything. A sharp knock at her door made her jump, tea sloshing over the rim of her cup. Elena's stomach clenched with familiar dread. Marcus. It had to be Marcus, come to drag her back into line, to remind her of her place and her promises. She opened the door expecting anger, expecting accusations, expecting the cold fury that always followed her rare moments of defiance. Instead, she found a castle page holding a silver tray. "Miss Eleanor Thorne?" The boy couldn't have been more than 16, his voice cracking slightly on her name. "Yes?" "From His Majesty." He thrust the tray toward her and disappeared back down the path before Elena could form a coherent response. Elena stared at the tray in her hands. Delicate china painted with blue roses, a pot of tea that smelled like jasmine and honey, fresh bread still warm from the ovens, and tucked beneath the sugar bowl a note written in elegant script. "You shouldn't have to choose between breakfast and dignity. Both are yours by right." Eleanor sank into her chair, the note trembling in her hands. When was the last time someone had brought her breakfast? When was the last time someone had thought about her comfort, her needs, without expecting something in return? She couldn't remember. The tea was perfect. Not too strong, sweetened just the way she liked it, though she'd never told anyone her preference. The bread was soft and rich, better than anything she could afford on her seamstress wages. But it was the thoughtfulness that undid her, the simple kindness of being seen and cared for. Elena was still crying over her breakfast when the second knock came. This time it was Marcus. She could feel his presence through the door like a gathering storm, all sharp edges and barely contained violence. Eleanor wiped her eyes quickly and smoothed her skirts before opening the door. "There you are." Marcus stepped inside without invitation, his pale eyes scanning the room until they landed on the breakfast tray. "What's this?" "Nothing," Elena said quickly, moving to clear the dishes. "Just breakfast." "From where?" His hand shot out, catching her wrist in a grip tight enough to bruise. "This china. This isn't from the village bakery." Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs. She knew that tone, knew the way Marcus's voice went quiet and dangerous when his control was slipping. "It's nothing, Marcus, just—" "Don't lie to me." His grip tightened, and Elena bit her lip to keep from crying out. Did he send this, the Alpha King? Elena's silence was answer enough. Marcus's face flushed red, his nostrils flaring with rage. "How dare you?" he hissed. "How dare you accept gifts from him? From any man? You're mine, Elena, mine. That ring on your finger—" "There is no ring on my finger," Elena said quietly, the words slipping out before she could stop them. Marcus went very still. His grip on her wrist shifted, thumb pressing against her pulse point hard enough to make her vision blur. "What did you say?" "The ring. He took it. Last night he—" The backhanded slap sent Elena stumbling backward, her cheek exploding with pain. She caught herself against the kitchen table, tasting blood where her teeth had cut her lip. "You let him touch you?" Marcus's voice was deadly quiet. "You let him put his hands on you?" Eleanor pressed her hand to her burning cheek, tears streaming down her face. "It wasn't like that. I was working, taking measurements and—" "And what? You forgot you belonged to me." Marcus stepped closer, and Eleanor instinctively shrank back. "You forgot 3 years of promises, 3 years of me taking care of you when no one else would?" Taking care of her. Eleanor almost laughed at the bitter irony. If this was care, if this was love, then she'd been living in a nightmare disguised as devotion. "Marcus, please!" Eleanor's voice came out small and broken. "I never meant, I didn't ask for any of this." "No, you just stood there and let it happen." Marcus grabbed her chin, forcing her to meet his eyes. "You stood there and let him humiliate me in front of the entire castle staff. Do you have any idea what people are saying about me today? About us?" Elena didn't answer. She didn't need to. She could see the humiliation burning in Marcus's pale eyes, the wounded pride that would demand payment in blood and tears. "I should have known," Marcus said softly, his thumb brushing across the bruise he'd left on her cheek. "I should have known you'd turn into a whore the moment a more powerful man showed you attention." The word hit Elena like a physical blow. She jerked back from his touch, anger flaring bright and hot in her chest. "Don't call me that. What else should I call a woman who spreads her legs for any man with a crown?" "I didn't." Eleanor's voice cracked. "I would never—" "Wouldn't you?" Marcus smiled, and it was cruel and cutting. "Tell me, Elena, when he touched you yesterday, when he took my ring from your finger, what did you feel?" Elena opened her mouth to deny it, to say she felt nothing, to give him the answer he wanted. But the lie wouldn't come, because she had felt something, something warm and golden and impossible, something that had made her feel alive for the first time in years. Her silence was confession enough. "That's what I thought." Marcus released her chin with enough force to snap her head back. "You're a slut, Elena. A faithless, worthless slut who can't keep her legs closed around powerful men." Each word was designed to cut, to wound, to make her feel as small and worthless as possible. Elena had heard them all before, had learned to let them wash over her like rain. But today, with the taste of kindness still sweet on her tongue, and the memory of gentle hands still warm on her skin, the words felt different. They felt like lies. "Get out!" The words came out stronger than Eleanor had intended, clear and firm despite the tears streaming down her face. Marcus blinked, clearly not expecting resistance. "What did you say?" "I said get out." Eleanor lifted her chin, meeting his gaze despite the fear clawing at her throat. "This is my house. Get out." "Your house?" Marcus laughed, but there was something ugly in it. "This house that I pay the rent on, the house where I've been supporting your worthless ass for 3 years?" The reminder hit home, as he'd known it would. Eleanor had no money of her own, no family to take her in, nowhere to go if Marcus withdrew his support. She was trapped, dependent, powerless, exactly the way he liked it. But before Elena could crumble, before she could apologize and beg and fall back into the familiar pattern of submission, another knock sounded at the door. Marcus cursed under his breath. "If that's him—" "It's not." Elena wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "He said he wouldn't come. He said the choice was mine." But when she opened the door, it wasn't the Alpha King. It was a woman Eleanor recognized from the castle, older and elegantly dressed, with silver-streaked hair and kind eyes that immediately took in Eleanor's tear-stained face and rapidly swelling cheek. "Miss Thorne," the woman said gently. "I'm Lady Catherine, the Alpha King's personal secretary. His Majesty sent me to speak with you." "She's busy," Marcus said sharply from behind Elena. "We're in the middle of a private conversation." Lady Catherine's eyes moved to Marcus, and her expression hardened slightly. "I see. And you are?" "Marcus Brennan, Elena's fiancé." "Former fiancé," Lady Catherine corrected pleasantly. "As I understand it, the engagement was dissolved yesterday evening." Marcus stepped forward, his face flushing with fresh anger. "The engagement stands until I say otherwise." "Actually," Lady Catherine said, her voice taking on a steel edge that reminded Elena uncomfortably of the Alpha King, "the engagement was dissolved the moment His Majesty removed your ring from Miss Thorne's finger. That constitutes a formal challenge to your claim, which you failed to answer." "I wasn't given the chance to—" "You were given every chance. You chose to leave rather than fight." Lady Catherine stepped into the house, her presence somehow making the small space feel safer. "Now, Mr. Brennan, I believe Miss Thorne asked you to leave." Marcus's hands clenched into fists at his sides. Elena could practically see the calculation behind his eyes, weighing the satisfaction of violence against the consequences of striking a woman under the Alpha King's protection. Finally, he stepped back. "This isn't over, Elena," he said quietly. "You think you can just throw away 3 years because some fancy man pays attention to you for 5 minutes? You think you can humiliate me and walk away?" Elena's throat felt tight with fear and unshed tears. "Marcus." "You'll come crawling back," he continued, his voice soft and poisonous. "When he gets bored, when he remembers you're nothing but a seamstress from the village, you'll come crawling back, and maybe, if you beg pretty enough, I'll consider taking you back." "That will never happen," Elena said quietly, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. Marcus smiled, cold and cutting. "We'll see." He pushed past Lady Catherine and out the door, leaving Elena shaking in the sudden silence. "Are you all right, dear?" Lady Catherine's voice was gentle, motherly. "He hurt you." Eleanor touched her swollen cheek gingerly. "It's nothing, I'm fine." "You're not fine, and it's not nothing." Lady Catherine moved to the kitchen, dampening a dish towel with cool water. "Here, this will help with the swelling." Eleanor accepted the towel gratefully, pressing it to her burning cheek. "Why are you here? What does the Alpha King want?" "To make sure you're safe, to give you options." Lady Catherine settled into the chair across from Elena, her expression serious. "He's worried about you." "He doesn't even know me." "Doesn't he?" Lady Catherine smiled slightly. "He knew your name yesterday before anyone told him. He knew how you like your tea. He's known about you for longer than you think, dear." Elena's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" "He's been watching you, Elena. Not in a predatory way," Lady Catherine added quickly, seeing Elena's expression. "But he's been aware of you. He's seen how you work, how you treat the other staff, how you carry yourself despite the way that man treats you. Marcus isn't— he's not usually. He hits you." The words were spoken gently, but with absolute certainty. "This isn't the first time." Elena's silence was answer enough. "You don't have to go back to him," Lady Catherine said softly. "You don't have to accept that treatment. His Majesty is offering you protection, employment at the castle, a chance to start over." "I don't understand why." Elena's voice came out small and broken. "I'm nobody. I'm nothing special." "You're his mate." Lady Catherine reached across the table, covering Elena's hand with her own. "That makes you the most important person in the kingdom." Elena shook her head. "That's impossible. Things like that don't happen to people like me." "What are people like you? Poor, ordinary, broken?" Elena's voice cracked on the last word. "I don't know how to be anything else." Lady Catherine was quiet for a long moment, studying Eleanor's face with compassionate eyes. "Can I tell you something about His Majesty?" Eleanor nodded. "He's been alone for a very long time. 35 years of ruling, of carrying the weight of the kingdom on his shoulders, of making impossible decisions and living with the consequences. He's had lovers, of course, political alliances and brief affairs, but never a mate, never someone who chose him for who he is rather than what he can give them." Elena's chest felt tight. "I don't know how to be that for him." "You already are." Lady Catherine squeezed Elena's hand. "You looked at him yesterday and saw a man, not a crown. You felt the bond and it terrified you, not because of his power, but because of what it meant. Because for the first time in your life, someone was offering you real love instead of ownership." Tears burned Elena's eyes. "I don't know how to trust that." "Then don't. Not yet." Lady Catherine smiled. "Trust yourself instead. Trust what you felt when he touched you. Trust the part of you that told Marcus to leave. He'll come back." Elena's voice was barely a whisper. "He always comes back." "Not if you don't want him to. His Majesty's protection isn't just words, dear. It's real. It's absolute. No one will hurt you again without answering to him." Elena stared down at her hands, at the pale band of skin where Marcus's ring had lived for 3 years. "I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to be free." "One day at a time," Lady Catherine said gently. "One choice at a time, starting with this. Will you come to the castle today? Not forever, not as any kind of commitment, just for today. Let him show you what it feels like to be cared for instead of controlled." Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. Every instinct screamed at her to say no, to stay safe in her small, controlled world, to avoid the terrifying possibility of hope. But underneath the fear was something else, something warm and golden that pulsed in rhythm with her heartbeat. The mate bond, the connection she'd felt the moment Darius touched her hand, the feeling of coming home. "Just for today?" Elena whispered. "Just for today," Lady Catherine confirmed, "though I have a feeling once you experience real kindness, you won't want to go back to anything less." Elena took a shaky breath, her mind racing with possibilities and fears. She thought about Marcus's cruel words, about 3 years of walking on eggshells and accepting crumbs of affection disguised as love. She thought about the breakfast tray, about gentle hands and golden eyes that looked at her like she was precious. She thought about choice, real choice, offered freely without strings or conditions. "All right," Elena said quietly, the words feeling like stepping off a cliff. "All right, I'll come." Lady Catherine smiled, and it was warm and proud and full of promise. "Good girl, His Majesty will be so pleased." As Elena gathered her things with trembling hands, as she prepared to step into a world she'd never imagined could be hers, she could feel the golden thread in her chest pulling tighter, drawing her towards something terrifying and wonderful and utterly unknown, drawing her toward the man who claimed she was his everything, the man who was offering her a choice she'd never thought she deserved, the choice to be loved instead of owned, to be cherished instead of controlled, to be everything instead of nothing. For the first time in 3 years, Elena chose herself. The days that followed were a strange rhythm of discovery and fear. Elena found herself living in a guest chamber at the castle, surrounded by more luxury than she'd ever imagined. Silk curtains that caught the morning light, a bed so soft she felt like she was floating, servants who treated her with genuine respect instead of tolerating her presence, and Darius, always Darius, appearing at unexpected moments with that patient smile and those golden eyes that saw straight through her carefully constructed walls. He brought her books when he discovered she could read, not romance novels or simple tales, but complex stories about brave women who chose their own destinies. He had the castle kitchen prepare foods he somehow knew she enjoyed, dishes she'd mentioned loving as a child but hadn't tasted in years. He never pushed, never demanded, never made her feel like his kindness came with a price. It was the gentleness that undid her, Eleanor had learned to survive cruelty, had built armour against harsh words and rough hands, but she had no defence against tenderness. She was working in the castle's sewing chambers on her 4th afternoon, hemming curtains for the guest quarters, when Darius appeared in the doorway. Elena's heart did that familiar skip at the sight of him, the golden thread in her chest pulling tight with awareness. "You don't have to work," he said softly, stepping into the room with that fluid grace that spoke of centuries of power. "You're a guest here, not a servant." Elena kept her eyes on her stitching, afraid of what he might see if she looked up. "I need to earn my keep. I can't just take charity." "It's not charity." His voice was closer now, and Elena could feel the warmth of his presence, like sunlight on her skin. "And you don't need to earn anything. You belong here." "I don't belong anywhere." The words slipped out before Eleanor could stop them, raw and honest in a way that made her wince. "Yes, you do." Darius moved around the table, settling into the chair across from her with careful deliberation. "You belong with me." Elena's hands stilled on the fabric. She could feel him watching her, could sense the intensity of his golden gaze even with her eyes downcast. "You don't know me, not really." "Then tell me." His voice was patient, inviting. "Tell me who you are when no one is telling you who to be." The question hit Elena like a physical blow. Who was she? For 3 years she'd been Marcus's fiancée, walking on eggshells and moulding herself into whatever shape would cause the least friction. Before that, she'd been the orphaned girl, grateful for any kindness, any attention, any scrap of affection offered her way. But who was Elena when she wasn't performing survival? "I don't know," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I've been pretending to be what other people wanted for so long, I don't remember who I actually am." "I do." Darius's voice was soft but certain. "You're brave, even when you're terrified. You're kind to people who can't do anything for you. You see beauty in small things and create it with your hands. You'd rather go hungry than take something you didn't feel you'd earned." Each word hit Elena like a revelation. He had been watching her, seeing her in ways she hadn't even seen herself. "How do you know all that?" "Because I've been looking for you my whole life." Darius reached across the table, his fingertips brushing against her knuckles. "Because the moment I saw you, everything made sense." The touch sent that familiar fire racing up Elena's arm, settling in her chest like a second heartbeat. She looked up finally, meeting his golden eyes, and felt something crack open inside her. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Of me? Of this? Of feeling this much? Of wanting something I can't have? Who says you can't have it?" Darius turned her hand over, his thumb tracing patterns on her palm. "What are you afraid of, Elena?" The question opened a floodgate. "I'm afraid you'll realise I'm not worth it. I'm afraid you'll get bored and send me away. I'm afraid Marcus will find a way to hurt me, or you, or both of us. I'm afraid I'll wake up and this will all be a dream." "And underneath all of that?" Elena's breath caught. "I'm afraid you're real. I'm afraid this is real, and I'll have to learn how to live in a world where someone actually loves me." The words hung in the air between them, raw and vulnerable and terrifying. Elena immediately wanted to take them back, to retreat behind her walls and pretend she hadn't just laid her heart bare. But Darius smiled, slow and warm and devastating. "That's the most honest thing anyone has ever said to me." Before Eleanor could respond, before she could process the gentle wonder in his voice, the sewing chamber door burst open. Marcus stood in the doorway, his face flushed with rage and something that looked like desperation. "There you are." His voice was rough, like he'd been drinking. "Do you have any idea how long I've been looking for you?" Elena's blood went cold. She tried to pull her hand away from Darius's, but his grip tightened gently, anchoring her. "Marcus, how did you get in here?" "I have connections, friends who remember what loyalty means." Marcus stepped into the room, his pale eyes fixed on their joined hands. "Unlike some people." "You need to leave." Darius's voice was calm, but Elena could feel the tension radiating off him like heat. Now. I need to talk to my fiancé. Marcus moved closer, and Eleanor instinctively pressed back in her chair. Alone. She's not your fiancé, Darius said pleasantly, and she's not going anywhere with you. That's not your decision to make. Marcus's face was getting redder, his control slipping with each word. Elena, come home, now. This is my home, Elena said quietly, surprising herself with the steadiness in her voice. I'm not going anywhere. The words hit Marcus like a slap. His face went from red to pale in the space of a heartbeat, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. Your home? His voice was deadly quiet. This castle, with him, you think you belong here? She belongs wherever she chooses to be, Darius said, his thumb still tracing gentle patterns on Elena's palm. And she's chosen here. She's chosen a fantasy. Marcus laughed, but there was nothing humorous in it. Eleanor, do you really think this is going to last? Do you think he's going to want you once the novelty wears off? Each word was designed to cut, to wound, to make Eleanor feel small and worthless. She could feel the familiar pattern starting, the way Marcus always attacked her confidence before making his real move. You're nothing, Marcus continued, his voice getting sharper with each syllable. A seamstress? A peasant. You think you can play princess, but we both know what you really are. I know exactly what she is. Darius's voice cut through Marcus's tirade like a blade. She's my mate, my equal, my everything. Your plaything, Marcus sneered. Your temporary amusement. What happens when you get tired of her? What happens when you remember she's beneath you? That will never happen. Won't it? Marcus smiled, cruel and cutting. She'll bore you, they always do, and when she comes crawling back to me, begging for forgiveness, maybe I'll take pity on her. Maybe. Eleanor felt something snap inside her chest. 3 years of accepting his cruelty, 3 years of believing his words, 3 years of letting him define her worth. But sitting here with Darius's gentle touch grounding her, feeling the mate bond pulse with warmth and certainty, Marcus's words sounded different. They sounded like lies. No. The word came out stronger than Elena had intended, clear and firm despite the fear clawing at her throat. Marcus blinked, clearly not expecting resistance. What did you say? I said no. Elena stood up, her hands still clasped in Darius's. I won't come crawling back to you. I won't beg for anything from you, and I won't let you talk about me like I'm nothing. You are nothing, Marcus snarled, his mask of control finally slipping completely. You're a worthless little... He moved faster than Elena expected, his hand raised to strike, but Darius was faster. One moment he was sitting calmly in his chair, the next he was standing between Elena and Marcus, one hand wrapped around Marcus's wrist in a grip that made the other man cry out, Don't! Darius's voice was soft, but there was something in it that made the air thick with threat. Don't even think about finishing that sentence. Marcus tried to pull away, but Darius's grip was like iron. You can't stop me from disciplining my woman. She's not your woman, she never was. Darius's golden eyes had gone dark, and Eleanor could feel the power radiating off him in waves. And if you ever raise a hand to her again, I'll break every bone in your body. You can't threaten me. I have rights. You have nothing. Darius released Marcus's wrist with enough force to send him stumbling backward. You had a chance to cherish something precious, and you chose to abuse it instead. Now you have nothing. Marcus cradled his wrist against his chest, his face pale with shock and pain. This isn't over. She's mine, and I'll get her back. No, Elena said quietly, stepping out from behind Darius's protective bulk. I'm not yours. I never was yours. I was just too afraid to see it. The words seemed to hit Marcus harder than any physical blow. His face cycled through rage and pain and something that might have been grief before settling on cold fury. You'll regret this, he said quietly, his voice shaking with emotion. Both of you. You think you can humiliate me and walk away? You think there won't be consequences?" "The only consequence," Darius said pleasantly, "will be what happens to you if you don't leave my castle immediately." Marcus looked between them, calculation flickering in his pale eyes. Elena could practically see him weighing the satisfaction of violence against the very real threat of retaliation from an Alpha King. Finally, he stepped back. "Enjoy your whore, Your Majesty. When you're done with her, remember that I warned you what she was." The words hit Elena like a physical blow, making her flinch despite everything. But before the shame could take hold, before she could spiral into the familiar pattern of self-doubt, Darius moved. He was across the room in 2 strides, his hand wrapped around Marcus's throat, lifting him clear off the ground. Marcus's feet kicked uselessly at the air, his face turning red as Darius's grip tightened. "Apologize," Darius said softly, his voice deadly calm. "Apologize to my mate for your disrespect, and I might let you leave here breathing." Marcus's mouth worked soundlessly, his hands clawing at Darius's wrist. Elena could see the moment he realized he was completely outmatched, that all his bluster and threats meant nothing against true power. "I'm sorry," he gasped out. "I'm sorry." Darius held him for another long moment before releasing him. Marcus collapsed to his knees, gasping and coughing, his hand pressed to his bruised throat. "If I see you near her again," Darius said conversationally, "if I hear that you've spoken her name or thought about her for longer than a second, I will hunt you down and finish what I started here. Do we understand each other?" Marcus nodded frantically, still gasping for air. "Good." Darius stepped back, his posture relaxing slightly. "Guards will escort you from the castle. If you're found on the grounds again, they have orders to kill you on sight." Marcus scrambled to his feet, shooting Elena one last look of pure hatred before fleeing from the room. Elena could hear his footsteps echoing down the hallway, growing fainter and fainter until they disappeared entirely. In the sudden silence, Elena became aware that she was shaking. The adrenaline of confrontation was wearing off, leaving her feeling raw and exposed and terrified of what she'd just done. "Hey!" Darius's voice was gentle again, all traces of threat gone. "You're safe. He's gone." Elena nodded, but she couldn't seem to stop shaking. "I can't believe I did that. I can't believe I stood up to him." "I can." Darius moved toward her slowly, giving her space to retreat if she needed it. "You've been brave your whole life, Elena. You just needed to realize it." "I don't feel brave. I feel terrified." "Good." Darius smiled, reaching out to brush a tear from her cheek. "Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do what needs to be done despite the fear." Eleanor leaned into his touch, letting herself take comfort in his strength. "What happens now?" "Now you heal," Darius said softly. "Now you learn what it feels like to be cherished instead of controlled. Now you discover who you are when you're not fighting just to survive." Elena looked up into his golden eyes, seeing patience and love and unwavering certainty. "And if I'm not who you think I am? If I disappoint you?" "Impossible." Darius cupped her face in his hands, his touch gentle but sure. "You're my mate, Elena, my other half. You could never disappoint me." "How can you be so certain?" "Because I feel it." He pressed his forehead to hers, his breath warm against her lips. "Right here, in my chest, the same thing you feel, the golden thread that connects us, that makes everything else fade away." Elena closed her eyes, letting herself feel the bond that pulsed between them. Warm and sure and unbreakable, like coming home after a lifetime of being lost. "I feel it too," she whispered. "I've felt it since the moment you touched my hand." "Then trust it," Darius said softly. "Trust me. Trust yourself. Trust that this is real and right and everything we both need." Eleanor opened her eyes, meeting his golden gaze, and made a choice. Not because she was forced to, not because she was afraid of the consequences of refusing, but because she wanted to. Because for the first time in her life, Someone was offering her love without conditions, protection without control, a future without limits, because the man holding her face so gently in his hands looked at her like she was precious, like she was everything. "I trust you," she whispered, and felt the golden thread in her chest blaze with warmth and light and hope. "Then we'll figure out the rest together," Darius said, and kissed her forehead with infinite tenderness. In that moment, with Marcus's threats still echoing in her ears and her future uncertain, Eleanor felt something she'd almost forgotten existed. She felt safe. She felt chosen. She felt like she was exactly where she belonged. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of discovery and healing. Elena found herself settling into castle life with surprising ease, her days filled with gentle conversations and quiet moments that helped her remember who she was beneath years of Marcus's manipulation. Darius was patient, never pushing, never demanding more than she was ready to give. But the mate bond between them grew stronger with each passing day, a golden thread of warmth that connected them even when they were apart. Eleanor was learning to laugh again, to speak her mind without fear of retribution, to believe that she deserved kindness without having to earn it through perfect behaviour. She should have known it couldn't last. The attack came without warning, just after dawn on a Tuesday morning. Elena was in the castle gardens, sketching dress designs in a journal Darius had given her, when the first scream echoed across the courtyard. She looked up to see guards running toward the main gate, their weapons drawn, their faces grim with purpose. And then she saw him, Marcus, standing at the head of a group of armed men, his face twisted with rage and something that looked like madness. He wasn't alone this time. Behind him stood a dozen beta wolves, their eyes glowing with the supernatural fury of their kind. "Elena!" Marcus's voice carried across the garden, rough with desperation. "Elena, I know you're here. Come out and face me." Elena's blood turned to ice. She dropped her journal, her hands shaking as she pressed herself against the garden wall. How had he gotten past the guards? How had he brought armed men onto castle grounds? "Miss Eleanor." One of the gardeners appeared at her side, his face pale with fear. "His Majesty wants you in the Great Hall immediately. You'll be safe there." But as Elena ran toward the castle, her heart hammering against her ribs, she could hear Marcus's voice growing louder, more desperate, more dangerous. "You can't hide from me forever, Elena. You belong to me. You've always belonged to me." By the time Elena reached the Great Hall, it was already filled with people. Courtiers and servants pressed against the walls, their faces tight with fear and anticipation. At the centre of the room, on the raised dais where the throne sat, Darius stood in full royal regalia. He looked every inch the Alpha King, power radiating from him in waves that made the air thick and electric. His golden eyes found Elena the moment she entered, and she saw relief flicker across his features. "Come here," he said softly, extending his hand toward her. Elena moved through the crowd on shaking legs, aware of every whisper, every stare, every curious glance. When she reached the dais, Darius helped her up the steps, his touch warm and grounding against her cold skin. "He can't hurt you," Darius said quietly, his voice meant for her ears alone. "Not here. Not ever again." Before Elena could respond, the great doors to the hall burst open. Marcus strode in, flanked by his beta enforcers, his pale eyes scanning the crowd until they found Eleanor on the dais. The smile that spread across his face was cold and triumphant. "There she is," he said loudly, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall. "My runaway bride." "You have no business here," Darius said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "Leave, now, before I have you executed for trespassing." "I have every right to be here." Marcus pulled a scroll from his jacket, unrolling it with a flourish. "A formal challenge witnessed and sealed by the Beta Council. I demand the return of my property." The word property hit Elena like a physical blow. She felt Darius tense beside her, felt the dangerous shift in his energy that spoke of barely leashed violence. "She's not your property," Darius said softly, but his voice carried to every corner of the hall. "She never was." 3 years of engagement says otherwise. Marcus held up the scroll. 3 years of promises and commitment. You stole her from me, your majesty. The law demands satisfaction. "The law," said a new voice from the back of the hall, "requires the woman's consent." Elena turned to see Lady Catherine approaching, flanked by several court officials. The older woman's face was grim, but determined as she climbed the steps to the dais. "Miss Thorne was never legally bound to you," Lady Catherine continued, her voice clear and authoritative. "An engagement requires free consent, which cannot be given under duress or coercion." Marcus's face flushed red. "She gave her consent freely. She wore my ring for 3 years." "She wore your ring because you threatened her sister's safety if she refused," Lady Catherine said calmly. "We have witnesses." The words hit the hall like a thunderclap. Eleanor heard the sharp intake of breath from the assembled crowd, saw the way several courtiers looked at Marcus with newfound disgust. "Lies!" Marcus snarled, but Elena could see the desperation creeping into his eyes. "Elena, tell them you came to me willingly." All eyes turned to Elena. She stood frozen on the dais, feeling the weight of every gaze in the room. This was her moment, her chance to speak her truth before witnesses who could ensure it was heard, but the words wouldn't come. 3 years of conditioning, of learning to stay silent, of believing that her voice didn't matter, held her tongue like chains. "Elena?" Marcus's voice had taken on that familiar edge of threat. "Tell them." "She doesn't have to tell anyone anything," Darius said quietly, stepping slightly in front of Elena. "Her silence is answer enough." "Her silence proves nothing," Marcus snapped. "Elena, if you don't speak up, if you don't tell them the truth, I'll make sure your sister pays for your betrayal." The threat hung in the air like poison. Eleanor felt something inside her chest crack open, not with fear this time, but with rage. How dare he threaten Sarah, sweet innocent Sarah who had never hurt anyone in her life? "Don't you dare!" Elena's voice rang out clear and strong, surprising even herself with its power. "Don't you dare threaten my sister!" Marcus smiled, thinking he'd won. "Then tell them—" "I'll tell them the truth," Elena interrupted, stepping forward until she stood at the very edge of the dais. "I'll tell them that you manipulated me when I was 18 and alone and terrified. I'll tell them that you threatened to hurt Sarah if I didn't agree to marry you. I'll tell them about the bruises you left on my arms, the cruel words you used to make me believe I was worthless." Each word rang through the hall like a bell. Eleanor could see the shock and disgust on the faces in the crowd, could feel the tide of opinion turning against Marcus with every revelation. "I'll tell them," Elena continued, her voice growing stronger with each word, "that I never loved you, that I was never yours, that every moment with you was a prison I was too afraid to escape." Marcus's face had gone from red to white, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. "You lying little—" "She's not lying." Darius stepped up beside Elena, his presence solid and reassuring. "And even if she were, it wouldn't matter. She's chosen me. The mate bond has been acknowledged and accepted. Your claim is void." "The mate bond?" Marcus laughed, but it was wild and desperate. "She's human, you fool. Humans can't be mates to our kind. She's deluding herself and you're letting her." "Wrong." Darius's voice cut through the hall like a blade. "She carries the mark of my bloodline, distant, diluted, but there. My mate, my equal, my everything." Eleanor stared at him in shock. She had wolf blood? That explained the bond, the connection she'd felt from the first moment they touched. But more than that, it explained why she'd always felt different, always felt like she didn't quite fit in the human world. "Even if that's true," Marcus said desperately, "it doesn't matter. She promised herself to me. She wore my ring. She shared my bed." "I never shared your bed," Elena said quietly, the lie hanging between them like a challenge. Marcus's face twisted with rage and humiliation. "You will," he snarled, "when I drag you back home, when I remind you what happens to faithless whores." He never finished the sentence. Darius moved faster than human eyes could follow, crossing the space between them in a single bound. His hand closed around Marcus's throat, lifting him clear off the ground as supernatural power filled the air like electricity. "You just threatened my mate," Darius said conversationally, his voice deadly calm, despite the fury radiating from every line of his body. "In my hall, before my people, that constitutes an act of war." Marcus's feet kicked uselessly at the air, his face turning red as Darius's grip tightened. "Please," he gasped. "I didn't mean—" "Yes, you did." Darius held him there for another long moment, letting the threat sink in before releasing him. Marcus collapsed to the floor, gasping and coughing, his hand pressed to his bruised throat. "But I'm feeling generous today," Darius continued, his golden eyes never leaving Marcus's face. "So I'm going to give you a choice. Challenge me formally, here and now, for the right to claim her. Fight me as wolves fight, and let fate decide who she belongs with." The hall went dead silent. Elena could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears as she realized what Darius was offering. A formal challenge, a fight to the death, with her as the prize. "Or," Darius continued pleasantly, "you can leave my kingdom and never return. Forget she exists. Forget her name. Live with the knowledge that you had something precious and threw it away through your own cruelty." Marcus struggled to his feet, his face cycling through rage and calculation and fear. Elena could see him weighing his options, measuring his strength against an alpha king who had ruled for 35 years. "Well," Darius asked mildly, "what will it be?" For a moment Elena thought Marcus might actually be stupid enough to fight. His pride was wounded, his reputation in tatters, his control over her completely shattered. But even in his rage he wasn't completely suicidal. "This isn't over," he said finally, his voice rough with defeat and fury. "She'll never be happy with you. She'll never be enough for you. When you realize what she really is, when you get bored with your little pet, remember that I tried to save you from making a mistake." "The only mistake here was yours," Darius replied calmly. "You had a chance to cherish something precious, and you chose to abuse it instead. Now live with the consequences." Marcus shot Elena one last look of pure hatred before turning and stalking from the hall, his beta enforcers trailing behind him like whipped dogs. Elena watched him go, feeling a strange mixture of relief and anticlimactic disappointment. It was over. Just like that, it was over. "Are you all right?" Darius turned to her, his hands gentle on her shoulders, his golden eyes searching her face for signs of distress. Elena nodded, though she wasn't entirely sure it was true. "I can't believe I did that. I can't believe I told everyone." "You were magnificent," Darius said softly, his voice full of pride and love and awe. "Brave and strong and absolutely magnificent." "I don't feel brave. I feel terrified." "Good." Darius cupped her face in his hands, his touch infinitely gentle. "You just faced down your worst fear in front of a room full of strangers. You chose truth over safety, courage over comfort. You chose yourself." Eleanor looked up into his golden eyes and felt the last of her walls crumble. "I chose you," she whispered. "I choose you." "And I choose you," Darius replied, his voice rough with emotion. "Always and forever, I choose you." Before Elena could respond, before she could process the magnitude of what had just happened, Darius kissed her. Not the gentle, careful kisses they'd shared before, but something claiming and passionate and desperate. A kiss that spoke of relief and triumph, and a love too big for words. The hall erupted in cheers and applause, but Elena barely heard them. All she could focus on was the taste of him, the warmth of his hands, the way the mate bond flared between them like golden fire. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Elena realized that something fundamental had shifted. She wasn't the scared, broken girl who had stumbled into his life 3 weeks ago. She wasn't Marcus's victim or anyone's property. She was Elena Thorne, mate to the Alpha King, chosen and cherished and free. "What happens now?" she asked softly, her forehead pressed against his. Darius smiled, slow and warm and full of promise. "Now we plan our future," when he said, "together, as equals, as mates." "And Marcus?" "Marcus is the past," Darius said firmly. "Our future starts now." Eleanor closed her eyes and let herself feel the truth of it. The golden thread in her chest pulsed with warmth and certainty, connecting her to the man who had seen her worth when she couldn't see it herself. The man who had fought for her, claimed her, chosen her. The man who loved her exactly as she was. For the first time in her life, Eleanor felt truly free. Free to love, free to choose, free to become whoever she was meant to be. Free to be everything instead of nothing. And as Darius led her from the hall, his hand warm and sure in hers, Eleanor knew that her real life was finally about to begin. 2 months later, Eleanor barely recognized the woman she'd been when she first stumbled into Darius's world. The scared, broken girl who had cowered under Marcus's cruelty felt like a distant memory, replaced by someone stronger, braver, infinitely more alive. She stood now in her private chambers, wearing a dress of her own design, deep emerald silk that brought out the green flecks in her hazel eyes. Her hair fell in soft waves around her shoulders, no longer pulled back in the severe bun Marcus had preferred. She looked like herself finally, for the first time in years. A soft knock at her door made her turn, and Eleanor's heart did that familiar skip as Darius appeared in the doorway. Even after weeks of waking up to his smile, of falling asleep in his arms, the sight of him still took her breath away. "Beautiful," he said softly, his golden eyes warming as they travelled over her. "Though you always are." Elena felt heat rise in her cheeks. Even now, even after everything they'd shared, compliments still felt foreign on her skin. "You're early." "I finished the council meeting sooner than expected." Darius crossed the room in those fluid strides that spoke of predatory grace, reaching for her hands. "I couldn't wait to see you." The mate bond hummed between them, warm and constant as a second heartbeat. Elena had learned to trust that feeling, to let it guide her when doubt crept in. And there had been doubt in those early weeks. Moments when she couldn't quite believe this was real, when the old fears whispered that she wasn't worthy of such love. But Darius had been patient, as always, patient when nightmares woke her screaming, patient when she flinched from sudden movements, patient when her past made it hard to accept the present. "How was the Lunar Council meeting?" Darius asked, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Lady Catherine said you handled the border dispute beautifully." Eleanor's heart swelled with pride. The Lunar Council had been her idea, a way to give the women of the kingdom a voice in matters that affected their families. It was small work compared to Darius's responsibilities, but it was hers, and she was good at it. Mrs. Hammond and Mrs. Green were ready to start a war over those property lines, Elena laughed. But once we got them talking about their grandchildren instead of their grievances, they found common ground quickly enough. "You have a gift for that," Darius said seriously, "for seeing what people really need, not just what they think they want." Eleanor leaned into his touch, still marvelling at how safe she felt in his presence. "I learned from the best." "No." Darius cupped her face in his hands, his expression tender. "That wisdom was always yours. I just gave you the space to let it flourish." Before Elena could respond, another knock interrupted them. This time it was Lady Catherine, her face bright with excitement. "Your Majesty, Miss Elena, she's here." Elena's heart leapt. "Sarah?" "Waiting in the blue parlour," Lady Catherine confirmed, "and she's brought someone with her." Elena was out the door before Lady Catherine finished speaking, Darius's amused chuckle following her down the corridor. She found her sister exactly where Lady Catherine had said, standing by the tall windows that overlooked the castle gardens. Sarah looked exactly the same and completely different all at once. Same copper-coloured hair, same freckles scattered across her nose, same bright blue eyes. But there was a confidence in her bearing that hadn't been there before, a happiness that radiated from her like sunlight. "Elena!" Sarah turned and flew across the room, catching her older sister in a fierce embrace. "Look at you! You're glowing!" Elena laughed, holding her sister tight. "Look at me! Look at you! You're beautiful, Sarah. Happy." "I am." Sarah pulled back, her eyes sparkling with joy. "Oh, Elena, I have so much to tell you, but first—" She turned toward the man who had been standing quietly by the fireplace. "I want you to meet James." The man stepped forward with a shy smile. He was tall and lean, with kind eyes and gentle hands that spoke of someone who worked with them for a living. A farmer, Elena realized, or perhaps a craftsman. "James Fletcher," he said simply, offering Eleanor a respectful bow. "It's an honour to meet you, Miss Thorne." Eleanor looked between her sister and this man, seeing the way they stood close together, the way Sarah's hand found his without conscious thought. "James," she repeated softly, understanding flooding through her. "You're—" "We're engaged," Sarah said breathlessly, her face flushing pink with happiness. "I know it's sudden, and I know you probably want to interrogate him, but Elena, he's wonderful. He makes me laugh, and he's kind, and he loves me exactly as I am." Elena felt tears prick at her eyes. This was what love was supposed to look like. Joy and choice and two people building something beautiful together. "Are you happy?" "So happy," Sarah whispered, "happier than I ever thought possible." "Then that's all that matters." Elena turned to James, studying his face carefully. She could see honesty there, gentleness, the kind of steady strength that would weather storms without breaking. "James, welcome to the family." His relief was palpable. "Thank you, Miss Thorne. I promise you I'll take care of her. I'll love her the way she deserves to be loved." "I can see that you will." Eleanor smiled, meaning it completely. "And please call me Elena." "Actually," came Darius's amused voice from the doorway, "she'll be your Majesty soon enough." Eleanor felt heat flood her face as Darius entered the room, his presence immediately commanding attention. Sarah's eyes went wide, taking in the Alpha King in all his casual magnificence. "Your Majesty," Sarah breathed, dropping into a curtsy so deep her skirts pooled around her. "I'm so honoured." "None of that," Darius said gently, moving to Eleanor's side. "You're family now. Darius will do just fine." Sarah straightened, her eyes darting between Elena and Darius with growing understanding. "You're really going to marry him," she said softly. "You're really going to be queen." "Lunar queen," Elena corrected automatically, then caught herself. "I mean, yes, when we're married." Darius chuckled, his arms sliding around Elena's waist in a gesture so natural it felt like breathing. "There's no if about it. I've been trying to convince your stubborn sister to marry me for weeks." Elena elbowed him gently. "You have not. You've been perfectly patient." "I've been patient," Darius agreed, "but that doesn't mean I don't want to make it official. I want everyone to know you're mine, just as I'm yours." The words sent warmth spiralling through Elena's chest. Even now, even after everything they'd shared, declarations like that still made her feel like she was floating. "Is that a proposal?" she asked softly, aware that Sarah and James were watching with barely contained excitement. "No," Darius said seriously. "This is a proposal." Before Elena could blink, he was down on one knee before her, a small velvet box in his hands. The room went dead silent, the only sound Elena's sharp intake of breath. "Elena Thorne," Darius said, his voice warm and sure and full of love. "You walked into my life when I had given up hope of finding my other half. You showed me what it means to love someone not for what they can give you, but for who they are in their heart. You've made me a better man, a better king, a better person in every way." Elena's hands flew to her mouth, tears already streaming down her face. This wasn't how she'd imagined this moment. She thought it would be private, intimate, just the two of them. But having Sarah here, having family witness this moment, made it even more perfect. "Will you marry me?" Darius asked, opening the box to reveal a ring that took Elena's breath away. It wasn't large or ostentatious, but it was perfect. A deep emerald surrounded by diamonds, set in silver that would catch the light like stars. "Will you be my mate, my partner, my queen for the rest of our lives?" Eleanor looked down at the man kneeling before her, this powerful, wonderful man who had seen her worth when she couldn't see it herself. The mate bond hummed between them, golden and warm and unbreakable. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes, yes, of course, yes." Darius's smile was blinding as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, like it had been made for her hand. Like everything about this moment had been written in the stars long before they were born. He rose and kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promise, while Sarah cheered and James applauded, and Elena felt her heart expand with so much joy she thought it might burst. When they finally broke apart, Elena stared down at the ring on her finger. "It's beautiful," she breathed, "but how did you know my size?" "I had Lady Catherine take one of your other rings to be measured," Darius admitted with a sheepish grin. "I've been planning this for weeks." "Weeks?" Eleanor laughed. "And here I thought you were being patient about marriage." "I was being patient about pressuring you," Darius corrected. "But I knew from the moment I met you that I wanted to spend forever with you. I was just waiting for you to be ready." Elena looked around the room, at Sarah glowing with happiness, at James watching them with respectful joy, at Darius, whose golden eyes held nothing but love and certainty. This was her family now. These people who chose to love her, who saw her value, who wanted her exactly as she was. "I'm ready," she said softly. "I've been ready for weeks. I was just too scared to admit it." "What were you afraid of?" Darius asked gently, though Eleanor could see he already knew the answer. "That I'd wake up and it would all be a dream, that you'd realize you made a mistake, that I'd somehow ruin this perfect thing we've built." Eleanor's voice shook slightly with remembered fear. "I've never had anything this good before. I didn't know how to trust it. And now?" Elena looked at her sister, radiant with her own happiness. She looked at the ring on her finger, symbol of a love freely given and joyfully received. She felt the mate bond pulse between them, warm and sure and eternal. "Now I know that love isn't something you earn," she said quietly. "It's something you choose, and every day you choose me, just like I choose you." "Every day for the rest of our lives," Darius agreed, pulling her close. The afternoon dissolved into celebration. Sarah insisted on hearing every detail of Elena's transformation from seamstress to Lunar Queen. James proved to be wonderful company, funny and kind, and clearly devoted to Sarah. They shared stories and laughter and dreams for the future. As evening fell and Sarah and James departed for their inn, promising to return tomorrow for wedding planning, Eleanor found herself alone with Darius in their private sitting room. She curled up beside him on the sofa, her head on his shoulder, watching the fire dance in the hearth. "Happy?" Darius asked softly, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "So happy," Elena murmured, echoing her sister's words from earlier. "I never thought I could feel like this, complete, peaceful, like everything finally makes sense." "That's how I've felt since the moment I met you," Darius said. "Like all the pieces of my life finally clicked into place." Elena tilted her head to look at him. "When do you want to have the ceremony?" "Tomorrow, if you'll have me," Darius replied immediately, making Elena laugh. "Be serious." "I am being serious." Darius's golden eyes were warm with amusement and love. "But I suppose we should give people time to plan. What would make you happy?" Elena considered. Something simple, not too big, not too formal. I want it to be about us, not about spectacle." "Done." Darius kissed her forehead. "Whatever you want, however you want it, this is your day." "Our day," Elena corrected. "Our beginning." "Our beginning," Darius agreed. "Though in my heart we began the moment you looked at me like I was just a man instead of a crown." Elena snuggled closer, letting herself melt into his warmth. Outside, snow was beginning to fall, the first of the winter season. But here, in their private sanctuary, surrounded by love and acceptance and the promise of forever, Elena felt nothing but warmth. She was Elena Thorne, seamstress turned lunar queen, survivor turned beloved, nothing turned everything. And for the first time in her life, she knew exactly where she belonged. Right here, in the arms of the man who loved her exactly as she was. The man who had taught her that she was worthy of being chosen. The man who had given her not just love, but freedom. The freedom to be herself, completely and without apology. The freedom to love and be loved in return. The freedom to believe that she deserved her happy ending. And as Darius's arms tightened around her, as the mate bond pulsed between them like a second heartbeat, Elena knew that this was just the beginning of their story. The best was yet to come. The morning of her wedding dawned clear and bright, sunlight streaming through the tall windows of Elena's chambers like a blessing. She stood before her mirror, hardly recognizing the radiant woman staring back at her. The wedding dress she'd designed and sewn herself was a masterpiece of simplicity and elegance, ivory silk that flowed like water over her curves, with delicate silver embroidery that caught the light like stars. But it was her face that truly amazed her. Gone was the haunted, fearful expression she'd worn for so many years. In its place was confidence, joy, the glow of a woman who knew she was loved and cherished exactly as she was. "Oh, Elena," Sarah breathed from behind her, her voice thick with tears. "You're absolutely beautiful." Elena turned to find her sister standing in the doorway, resplendent in her maid-of-honour dress of soft blue silk. Behind her came Lady Catherine, carrying a small velvet box with tears shining in her kind eyes. "From His Majesty," Lady Catherine said softly, presenting the box. "Something old, something new, something borrowed, something blue." Inside nestled a delicate silver necklace, clearly antique, with a pendant shaped like a crescent moon. It was beautiful in its simplicity, elegant without being ostentatious. "It belonged to his mother," Lady Catherine explained, as she fastened it around Elena's neck. "She wore it on her wedding day, as did his grandmother before her. He wants you to have it, to become part of the tradition." Elena's fingers traced the pendant, feeling the weight of history and acceptance. "I'm honoured," she whispered, "to be welcomed into his family this way." "You're not being welcomed," Sarah said firmly, adjusting the small circlet of silver and pearls in Elena's hair. "You're already family. This is just making it official." A soft knock at the door announced Darius's arrival. Elena's heart skipped as always at the sound of his voice, though she couldn't see him through the heavy wood. "I know it's bad luck to see the bride before the ceremony," came his warm, amused voice, "but I have something for you." "Close your eyes," Sarah called out, grinning as she opened the door just wide enough to accept whatever Darius was passing through. It was a single white rose, perfect in its simplicity, with a note tied around the stem in his familiar handwriting. "For my everything, today and always. D." Elena held the flower to her nose, breathing in its sweet fragrance, and felt tears of joy prick at her eyes. "He's perfect," she whispered. "He is," Lady Catherine agreed, "and more importantly, he's perfect for you." The ceremony was held in the castle's rose garden, transformed for the occasion with white silk and silver ribbons that fluttered in the gentle breeze. It was intimate, just as Elena had wanted, with only their closest friends and family in attendance. No political manoeuvring, no grand spectacle, just two people promising to love each other forever. Elena walked down the petal-strewn path with Sarah at her side, her heart hammering with joy rather than nerves. At the altar waited Darius, magnificent in his formal ceremonial robes, but it was his face that took her breath away. The love in his golden eyes, the way his entire being seemed to light up at the sight of her, the smile that was just for her. When she reached him, when he took her hands in his and looked into her eyes like she was the only person in the world, Eleanor felt the mate bond flare between them like golden fire. "You're breathtaking," he whispered, meant for her ears alone. "So are you," she whispered back, meaning it completely. The officiant's words washed over them like music, but Elena barely heard them. All her attention was focused on Darius, on the way his thumbs traced gentle circles on her knuckles, on the way he looked at her like she hung the moon and stars. When it came time for vows, Darius spoke first, his voice clear and strong and full of emotion. "Elena," he began, "you came into my life when I had given up hope of finding my other half. You taught me that love isn't about possession or control, but about choice and respect and partnership. You showed me that true strength comes not from never falling, but from getting up every time you do. I promise to love you exactly as you are, to support your dreams, to stand by your side as your equal partner in all things. I choose you, today and every day for the rest of our lives." Elena's eyes filled with tears as she spoke her own vows, her voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm her. "Darius," she said softly, "you saved me from a life I thought I deserved and showed me a love I never imagined possible. You taught me that I am worthy of kindness, of respect, of being chosen. You gave me not just your heart, but my freedom, my voice, my power. I promise to love you with all that I am, to stand beside you as your partner and equal, to choose courage over fear every single day. I choose you, now and forever." The rings were simple bands of silver, elegant in their simplicity. As Darius slipped Elena's wedding ring onto her finger, joining her engagement ring, she felt a sense of completion she'd never known existed. "By the power vested in me by the crown and the pack," the officiant pronounced, "I now declare you husband and wife, Alpha and Luna, bound by law and love and the sacred mate bond. You may kiss your bride, your majesty." Darius didn't need to be told twice. He cupped Elena's face in his hands and kissed her with all the love and passion and promise of forever, while their guests cheered and flower petals rained down around them like snow. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and glowing with joy, Elena looked out at the small gathering of people who had become her family. Sarah crying happy tears, Lady Catherine beaming with maternal pride, James grinning and applauding, the castle staff who had watched her transformation with wonder and acceptance. This was what love looked like. Not grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but simple acceptance, daily choice, the quiet certainty of being exactly where you belonged. The reception was held in the castle's smaller ballroom, warm and intimate with candles and flowers and the gentle music of a string quartet. Elena danced with her new husband, lost in his golden eyes and the feeling of his arms around her, the mate bond singing between them like the most beautiful song ever written. Later, much later, when the last guests had departed and they were finally alone in their chambers, Darius helped Elena out of her wedding dress with reverent hands and infinite tenderness. They made love as husband and wife for the first time, sealing their bond in the most intimate way possible, and Eleanor felt something shift deep in her soul. She was no longer alone. She would never be alone again. 6 months later, Eleanor stood in the Lunar Council chambers, presiding over a heated discussion about trade negotiations with the neighbouring kingdoms. She wore a deep blue gown that spoke of authority and elegance, her hair swept up in a style that showed off the lunar crown's delicate circlet of silver and sapphires. "The cotton tariffs are strangling our farmers, Mrs." Henderson was saying, her weathered hands gesturing emphatically. We need to renegotiate before the autumn harvest. Agreed, Elena said calmly, making notes in her leather-bound journal. I'll speak with His Majesty about arranging a summit with King Marcus of Westbrook. If we approach this as a partnership rather than a negotiation, we might find more success. She caught herself at the name. Not the same Marcus who had tormented her, but the coincidence still made her pause. How strange that a name that once held such terror for her was now just another word, stripped of its power to hurt her. After the meeting, Eleanor made her way to Darius's study, where she found him bent over maps and correspondence, his dark hair falling across his forehead in the way that always made her want to smooth it back. "Busy day?" she asked, settling into the chair across from his desk. "Always?" Darius looked up and smiled, the expression transforming his entire face. "But it gets better the moment you walk in." "Flatterer." Elena leaned back in her chair, studying his face. "We need to discuss the Westbrook situation. Mrs. Henderson is right about the tariffs." "I know. I've been putting off dealing with King Marcus because his negotiation style reminds me too much of—" Darius trailed off, but Elena understood. "It's all right," she said softly. "You can say his name. Marcus Brennan has no power over us anymore." "How do you do that?" Darius asked wonderingly. "How do you take something that caused you so much pain and strip away its ability to hurt you?" Elena considered the question seriously. "I think it's because I finally understand the difference between surviving and living. For years I was just surviving, letting fear make all my decisions. But now I'm living, really living, and fear doesn't get to be in charge anymore." Darius came around the desk and pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "I love you," he murmured against her hair. "I love your strength, your wisdom, your incredible heart." "I love you too," Elena replied, melting into his embrace. "More than I ever thought possible." They stood there in comfortable silence, holding each other as the afternoon sun streamed through the windows. Elena thought about the journey that had brought them here, from that first terrifying encounter in the fitting chamber to this moment of perfect contentment. "What are you thinking about?" Darius asked softly. "How different everything is now. How different I am." Elena pulled back to look at him. "Sometimes I can barely remember the woman who was so afraid of her own shadow." "She's still part of you," Darius said gently. "The part that survived, that endured, that never gave up hope even when things seemed impossible. I love her too." Elena felt tears prick at her eyes. Even now, after all this time, Darius still had the power to surprise her with his understanding, his acceptance of every part of who she was and who she'd been. "I've been thinking," she said carefully, "about expanding the Lunar Council program, maybe sending representatives to the other kingdoms, helping women who might be in situations like I was." Darius's eyes lit up with pride and admiration. "Tell me more." Elena launched into her ideas, her plans for creating a network of support that could reach beyond their borders. Darius listened with the focused attention he gave to all matters of state, asking intelligent questions, offering resources, treating her initiatives with the respect they deserved. This was what partnership looked like, what love looked like. Two people building something beautiful together, supporting each other's dreams, making each other stronger. As the sun set over the kingdom, as they made their way to their private chambers hand in hand, Eleanor reflected on how completely her life had changed. She was no longer the frightened girl who believed she was nothing. She was Elena Thorne, Lunar Queen, beloved wife, leader of her people. She was everything she'd never dared to dream she could be. And as Darius pulled her close, as the mate bond hummed between them warm and golden and eternal, Elena knew that this was just the beginning. Their story was far from over. There would be challenges ahead, political intrigue to navigate, neighbouring kingdoms to negotiate with, a pack to lead and protect. But they would face it all together, as partners, as equals, as mates bound by love and choice and an unbreakable bond. Elena Thorne had finally found her home, not in a place, but in a person, in the man who had seen her worth when she couldn't see it herself, in the love that had taught her she deserved everything. And as sleep claimed them both, wrapped in each other's arms in their marriage bed, Eleanor's last conscious thought was one of pure gratitude for the journey that had brought her here, for the man who loved her exactly as she was, for the life they were building together, for the freedom to choose love over fear, hope over despair, everything over nothing, for the chance to be not just surviving, but truly, completely, joyfully alive.